Have you ever been so tired, so spiritually drained, that even a miracle couldn't lift you up? Elijah called down fire from heaven, yet just days later, he was ready to die under a tree. What happened to the prophet who defied kings and outran chariots? Welcome to Midnight Psalms, where we uncover the hidden, raw, and sacred moments of Scripture that speak directly to our midnight hours, those times of silence, sorrow, and searching. Elijah was no ordinary man. He had just faced down 450 prophets of Baal in a showdown that ended with fire from heaven and a nation falling to its knees. He was bold, fearless, and anointed. But right after his greatest spiritual victory, something snapped. He ran. Not from armies, but from fear, exhaustion, and the weight of being alone. We often imagine spiritual burnout happening gradually, like a flame slowly dimming. But for Elijah, it was sudden, a crash that came after a mountaintop moment. That's where we find him now, not on Mount Carmel, but under a lonely broom tree, praying to die. What drove Elijah to such despair? Jezebel's threat was real, yes, but Elijah had faced worse. The truth is, when burnout hits, it distorts our vision. Everything feels bigger, heavier, darker. Elijah wasn't just afraid of Jezebel, he was overwhelmed by the emotional toll of being the only one left. Isolation has a way of lying to us, making us forget who walks with us and who's still standing beside us. His words weren't just dramatic, they were honest. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. And maybe you've prayed that same line in your own wilderness. There's something sacred about that tree. It became a shelter, not from Jezebel, but from Elijah's own expectations. He lay down, and he slept. And God didn't rebuke him. He didn't quote scripture or demand more faith. He simply let Elijah rest. In a culture that glorifies non-stop hustle and just pray harder, God's first answer to Elijah's despair was a nap. Rest is holy. And sometimes, the most spiritual thing you can do is sleep while heaven watches over you. But rest wasn't the only thing Elijah needed. As he slept, an angel touched him. Twice. Not with thunder or visions, but with food. A cake baked over hot coals. A jar of water. God knew Elijah's body was empty before his spirit could be filled again. Notice the order. Rest, then nourishment. It's a divine reminder that we are not just spirits, we are souls wrapped in flesh and bone. When the soul is weary, even the strongest faith needs time to recover. Elijah ate and rested again. Still no sermon. Still no command. Just gentle provision. And then the angel said, "The journey is too much for you." What a line. Even God agreed that this season was too heavy for Elijah to carry alone. Maybe you need to hear that too. That what you're going through is hard. That you're not weak for being tired. That your exhaustion doesn't cancel your calling. In fact, it's part of it. Strengthened by that meal, Elijah walked 40 days to Mount Horeb, the same mountain where God had met Moses. This wasn't a random destination. It was a sacred place, a spiritual reset. But when he arrived, Elijah still carried his grief. He hid in a cave. And again, God asked him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It wasn't a question of location, but of condition. God wasn't lost, Elijah was. He had lost sight of who he was, and more importantly, whose he was. Elijah poured out his heart. He said he was zealous, that everyone else had turned away, and that he was the only one left. God listened. He didn't interrupt. He allowed Elijah to lament, to express all the tangled threads of frustration, loneliness, and fear. And then came the encounter, not in wind, not in fire, not in earthquake, but in a whisper. That still, small voice. Sometimes God thunders, but in burnout, he often whispers. Because when the soul is fragile, whispers heal more than shouts. The whisper didn't just comfort Elijah, it redirected him. God gave him a new mission, a new path, and most importantly, reminded him he was not alone. "I have reserved 7,000, God said, who have not bowed to Baal." Elijah thought he was the last one standing. He wasn't. Burnout will always convince us that we're the only ones left, that no one understands, that we're abandoned. But heaven always sees more than we do. What happened under that tree wasn't the end. It was a pause. A sacred interruption. Elijah didn't stay under the tree or in the cave. He moved forward. Not with the same strength as before, but with new clarity. God's presence didn't erase Elijah's humanity, but it restored his direction. And that's often what we need, not escape, but renewal. Not answers, but presence. Not applause, but assurance. So if you're under your own broom tree tonight, if the weight feels unbearable, if you've prayed "I've had enough," this story is for you. Your fatigue doesn't disqualify you. Your questions don't offend heaven. God isn't waiting to scold you, He's waiting to feed you, to whisper to you, and to remind you. The journey is too much for you alone, but you are never alone. He's still with you, in the whisper, in the stillness, in the night. There's something deeply personal about how God deals with Elijah. He doesn't offer a crowd to cheer him up, or a miracle to impress him again. Instead, He gives him direction and connection. He sends Elijah to anoint Elisha, a companion who would not only carry the mantle but also walk beside him. Burnout often thrives in isolation, but healing happens in companionship. Elijah's story begins to shift the moment he stops walking alone. Maybe your next step isn't just spiritual, it's relational. Maybe healing comes through the hands of a friend who understands. Elisha wasn't just a follower, he became a mirror, a support, a reminder that legacy doesn't end with burnout. Elijah's ministry wasn't over. It was transforming. God was preparing him not just to keep going, but to pass on what he carried. Sometimes the weight feels too heavy because we were never meant to carry it forever. We're called to pour out, to disciple, to invest in others. And in doing so, we realize that our story has never been just about us. What's powerful is that God never rewinds Elijah's story to the glory of Mount Carmel. He doesn't replay the fire or demand another public showdown. Instead, he guides Elijah into a quieter obedience. Not less powerful, but more personal. Spiritual maturity often looks less like fireworks and more like faithfulness. Less like noise, more like depth. Elijah walked back into life not with loud declarations, but with a quiet confidence born in the stillness of that cave and the comfort of that tree. The broom tree isn't just a moment of weakness, it's a sacred place of divine pause. Some of the most transformational moments in Scripture happen in obscurity. Under trees, in caves, in deserts. Maybe that's where you are right now, off the radar, unseen, unheard. But those places are not forgotten by God. In fact, they're often chosen. The hidden spaces of pain become altars of preparation. And the same God who met Elijah under a tree meets you now, in your silence, in your fatigue, in your night. Elijah's story ends not with defeat, but with a chariot of fire. That same man who once begged to die was taken up in glory, never tasting death. Isn't it wild? That a man so human, so broken, so weary, would be chosen for such an exit. It tells us something profound. Burnout is not a full stop, it's a comma. It's not the end of your usefulness, it might be the beginning of your deeper purpose. God sees the entire arc of your story, even when you're stuck under the tree. Your tears matter to heaven. Your fatigue is not failure. If Elijah could go from calling fire down from heaven to collapsing in despair, then so can we. And just like him, we can also rise again. You're not too far gone. You're not too broken. You're not disqualified. The same God who whispered to Elijah still whispers to you. Not with condemnation, but with compassion. Not with pressure, but with peace. Listen closely, it may not come with thunder, but the whisper is there. In every generation, God calls prophets, intercessors, servants who burn with holy fire, and who also burn out. It's not weakness, it's reality. And that's why the broom tree story matters. It tells us that even the boldest need time to breathe. That even the anointed grow weary. That ministry without margin becomes misery. But the God who called you has also prepared rest for you. Divine rest. Gentle touch. Heavenly food. A whisper in the dark. Maybe tonight, instead of praying for strength to move, your prayer is simply, "Lord, hold me here." And that's enough. God isn't rushing you. He's not measuring your worth by your productivity. He's tending to your soul like he did with Elijah, quietly, faithfully, patiently. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit you're tired and trust that God can handle your humanity. You don't need to pretend. You don't need to perform. Just rest. And when the time is right, he'll call you out of the cave, not to the crowd, but to the next step. The next assignment. The next companion. Elijah didn't return to the mountaintop, but he returned to the mission. With new clarity. With fresh grace. With the reminder that the journey was never meant to be walked alone. That God isn't just found in the fire, but in the faintest whisper, in the deepest silence, in the quiet places of healing. So tonight, if you're under your own tree, spiritually exhausted, emotionally drained, unsure if you can go on, remember Elijah. Remember the nap, the angel, the bread, the whisper. Your burnout doesn't scare God. Your silence doesn't offend him. He sees you. He's with you. And when you're ready, he'll guide you forward. Gently, powerfully, faithfully. Until then, just rest, and let him whisper your name. This has been another night story from Midnight Psalms. If this message touched your heart, let it rest there. And if you feel led, stay with us. There's more light in the midnight than you think.